This investigation, I call it the nice letters. The nice letters asking the Biden officials to come in went out on May 22nd. It's June 3rd. Subpoenas should be flying off the shelves to these people.
So let's get to the big three.
Number 3.
So far, this investigation, I call it the nice letters. The nice letters asking the Biden officials to come in went out on May 22nd. It's June 3rd. Subpoenas should be flying off the shelves to these people. That is what Republicans need to do because this matters.
We know what he did. The question is, did he know what he did? I'm talking about President Biden, and the use of the autopen makes investigators think perhaps someone else was running the country. As James Comer has begun a massive investigation, we got the latest.
Number 2.
It is an incredible intelligence coup. Vladimir Putin is undoubtedly now wondering whether there was an inside job. You're probably going to see a witch hunt in Russia as he tries to figure out who did this inside.
In awe, Ukraine. Days after a stunning drone attack inside Russia's borders, they now blow up the base of the Crimean Bridge for a third time. Maybe Putin should consider a peace deal. I think he is actually calling the White House today.
Number 1.
How mad do you think President Trump is going to be when he finds out that Elon Musk said, "I'm sorry, but I just can't stand it anymore. This massive, outrageous, pork-filled congressional spending bill is a disgusting abomination. Shame on those who voted for it. You know you did wrong. You know it."
President's furious about this. Big, beautiful bill battle gets bizarre as Musk attacks. Thune defends, and I imagine Trump seethes. Now I know for sure he is. The Senate gets to work. Stop ranting and raving, guys and women, and start debating. We look at that and the trade deal deadline for the world. So the big, beautiful bill. You heard Peter Doocy going over it in his question. Out of nowhere, Elon Musk puts out on X. I'm sorry, I just can't stand it anymore. This massive, outrageous, pork-filled congressional spending bill is a disgusting abomination. Shame on those who voted for it. You know you did wrong. You know it. He went on to say Congress is making America bankrupt. Then Rand Paul posts on X, some of us are trying to stop that. Meanwhile, Trump blasts Rand Paul amid the budget bill battle on Truth Social. He says Rand Paul has very little understanding of the big, beautiful bill, especially the tremendous growth that is coming. He loves voting no on everything. He thinks it's good politics, but it's not. The BBB is a big winner. Rand votes no on everything, but never has any practical, constructive ideas. His ideas are actually crazy. They're losers. The people of Kentucky can't stand him. This is a big growth bill. So, look, I'm fed up with Rand Paul, too. You sit there in your ideologue and as a libertarian, I guess, and you wonder why people despise you. I'm not saying he's not bright, but get involved. So, of course, he's loving that Elon Musk is blowing this up. I don't get it. Here's Senator Thune with us yesterday, cut 4.
Will this lead to higher deficits? And the answer to that is no. You're going to get growth in the economy. And when the economy, again, is growing and expanding, you get more government revenue. You add to that the almost a couple $1 trillion in cuts that are in the bill, and you have the most significant reduction in spending and biggest amount of savings in history in this legislation.
So, and of course, Democrats now all of a sudden love Elon Musk. They're like, even Elon Musk is against it. You mean the guy that you think is the worst villain in American history? Now all of a sudden you're running to him? You have no credibility. People have pointed out that the subsidies for electric cars are in there and some other things that he likes. But look, I don't think I know Speaker Johnson took the time to explain to him what's in the bill and what they could do down the line once it passes. Here's Josh Holmes. He used to work for Mitch McConnell, cut 7.
He got the first part right with DOGE, outside the box, identifying things. The second part, not so much. He's talking about a spending bill. This is a reconciliation package. We deal with mandatory spending, which is entitlements, and we deal with taxes. This is about whether or not the American people deserve to keep their tax rates where they are. It has absolutely nothing to do with the spending side of it, which you can address in an appropriations process. It's kind of like a Washington 101. So I think a lot of this is shooting back and forth without kind of a basic understanding of how the government processes these things.
So we know, too, Josh Holmes from Ruthless, and he'll be on with us next week on One Nation, Sundays at 10 Eastern. All right. So President also set up today as a deadline for all our friendly nations to come together and just say, here's my offer when it comes to setting up a new trade relations with tariffs on trade. Caroline Levitt, cut 8.
USTR sent this letter to all of our trading partners just to give them a friendly reminder that the deadline is coming up. And they are in talks. Ambassador Greer, Secretary Bessent, Secretary Lutnick are in talks with many of our key trading partners around the globe. As you know, Brian, I know the Wall Street Journal has covered this quite heavily. And they continue to be engaged in those discussions. And this letter was simply to remind these countries that the deadline is approaching and the president expects good deals. And we are on track for that, I will emphasize.
Yeah, so that is Caroline Leavitt weighing in yesterday. And I hope some deals come in. Come on, India, Japan. I know Japan's the big thing with cars, but work it out. Come on, guys. The EU making progress. How great would it be for the markets and for the country to see the president this afternoon, who's speaking to Vladimir Putin today at 11. How great would it be for the country this afternoon for the president to say, I got 3 deals to announce? Let's do it. Come on. Boulder, Colorado, horrible, horrific flame-throwing attack on Sunday. Now we get more details about the killer from Egypt who lived in Kuwait for 20 years, came here on a tourist visa in 2022, got to stay, then was told to leave and he didn't. He waited for his oldest to graduate high school and then he did this attack. He went into 3 different gas stations so it wouldn't be a red flag to anyone. He dressed with a reflector dress like a landscaper so no one would think he was up to anything. And then you see him with a makeshift flamethrower because he couldn't get a gun as an illegal immigrant, light people on fire, including a Holocaust survivor whose feet were burned. And I think as many as 12 people. Why? Because they're Jewish. I mean, think about this. Because they're Jewish. Just sickening. So now I love what we're doing. We're kicking out the whole family. Cut 9.
Now, Mohammed's despicable actions will be prosecuted to the fullest extent of the law. But we're also investigating to what extent his family knew about this horrific attack, if they had any knowledge of it, or if they provided support to it. I am continuing to pray for the victims of this attack and for all of their families. Our thoughts and our prayers go out to all of them, and I want them to know that justice will be served.
I love it. And they all overstayed their visas. I don't know what their story is, but if their dad is a raging anti-Semite who probably hates our country too, don't you think that might have trickled out during dinner? Don't you think that he probably raised 5 kids who feel exactly the same way? Jessica Vaughn, the Center for Immigration Studies, cut 10.
I don't think anybody should shed too many tears over this. This is something that he and almost certainly his wife planned in advance. They went and applied for visas to come to the United States. Within a couple of weeks of that, they filed an asylum claim, knowing that under the Biden administration rules that they would be allowed to stay here indefinitely and get work permits. And even after that work permit expired, he stayed here as a visa overstay. We have more than 500,000 visa overstays every year. And this guy, along with hundreds of thousands of others, have completely exploited our visa system.
And as part of the revamp, I mean, I saw this, something like 5 million overstays. The number's through the roof. I don't know how we have the manpower to possibly follow up on this. I don't want to take too much time away from Dr. Oz or Cliff May, so I'm going to get out now. But I do think this. They didn't want to do immigration reform, and I didn't want to do it either. Probably you didn't either until they sealed the border. I didn't know if that would be possible without finishing the wall and getting the technology in place. But they really controlled the border. After they get through the big, beautiful bill and maybe the midterms, I think that we get together on expedited removal and get Democrats on board with it, with a term-limited president. I bet you they sign off on it. I don't buy the fact that both sides like to run on it. Not anymore. You already won on this. You don't need it. Dr. Mehmet Oz is the 17th administrator of the Center for Medicare and Medicaid Services. And man, does he have a vital job now more than ever as we try to get this thing financed and get the fraud out of it in the hopes of balancing our budget. Well, there's a lot of controversy now, and no one brighter, more astute, or better communicator than Dr. Oz himself. Dr. Oz, welcome back.
Brian, thanks for having me on. And you're right. This is an opportunity for us to save Medicaid. And I say that over and over again because I keep hearing the ads run from the other side. But there is no scenario in which we are not spending more on Medicaid. The question is how much more, and how do you also create the moral obligation, which I think benefits people, that they feel a need to work, to participate, to contribute in some way to their communities. That's what we're really focused on.
So Medicaid was intended for states to finance the poor and the elderly, correct?
Correct. And when it was signed in 1965, so it's having its 60th birthday on July 1st, there were 11 million people on Medicaid. During COVID, we got to 94 million. Actually, interestingly, over the last year, even before the president came in, there was already a realization amongst Democrats that this was a catastrophe, and they began to disenroll people, about 10 million Americans. But the structural issues remain, and that's what the president wants us to address.
So what right now, what is addressed in the bill from that the House gave to the Senate?
The key issues revolve around waste, fraud, abuse, areas where we know that there is legalized money laundering taking place by states. And I say that with respect because the governors are doing what they should do if they can get away with it, which is to try to take more money from the federal government than Congress had intended. And it's a process called a provider tax. And I don't have to walk everyone through it, but succinctly, they game the system to pretend they're spending more money than they really are, so the federal government matches that money and thus overpays. And that's a process that's been going on for years. Every president, Democrat and Republican, has lamented the fact that this exists. This Congress is stopping it, and which is a huge positive, and the president is very supportive for that reason. They're also doing something about this work requirement issue that I touched on at the outset, which is to require Americans, just like they do when they're getting SNAP food stamps, just like they do when they're getting temporary assistance for needy families, they have to demonstrate a desire to work. They don't necessarily have to get a job. Sometimes there's not a job there, or they're not equipped to do it well, but they have to apply or get an education or volunteer to help the community or just take care of someone in their family that needs help. But they've got to do something to demonstrate that they have agency over their future, that they matter. And if they do that, they keep their Medicaid. And if they don't want to do those things for whatever reason, then they're going to lose their Medicaid coverage, or they'll move on to a different program that already exists. Maybe they've got insurance from their employer, maybe they have it from the exchanges, but they're not going to be paid for by the taxpayer, who should appropriately desire that they're trying to help in their communities. And by the way, you pulled this out, Brian, over 2/3 of Americans believe that's a very rational desire.
Dr. Oz, how are you going to do it, though, to make sure there's no fraud when it comes to matching funds? Who's going to police the states?
It's easy to police them. We know exactly what they're doing because we're paying the bills. Brian, we pay out $1.7 trillion from this agency, Centers for Medicare and Medicaid. I know where every penny goes. We unfortunately don't always know that it's going to the right place. And this is a critical issue because fundamentally, if we're able to tell states, hey, listen, you can't get away with this anymore, we're not going to allow it, they won't do it because they'll follow the rules. Again, these are not bad people doing this. They're just taking advantage of a system that was designed with loopholes and problems in its enforcement. And that's one of the reasons that I believe when Congress passes this, it'll actually help states because they'll know what the rules are. By the way, this is how this president works across the board. He likes to understand the fundamental flaw and then negotiate the settlement. Good example, most favored nation status for our medications. Right now, Americans have to choose between grocery and their medications. 1/3 of Americans, when they go to the pharmacy, cannot pick up their prescriptions because they can't afford them. This drives up the cost of Medicaid. It drives up the cost of health care across the country. And many Americans, because they're faced with this moral quandary, are frustrated and angry. So the president said, enough. We're funding a lot of the research that generates these drugs. It's not fair.
What are you going to do in Medicaid? In California, they want to pay for illegal immigrants' health care. So that's Medicaid. So what are you going to do when the governor of California says, no, I'm doing this?
Brian, we're done. We're not paying them. We already took back $53 million on this. They know they're on notice. There's a new sheriff in town. They can't get away with it. And they're not. This is not about people in this situation specifically doing things that they that they know are ethically maybe wrong, but they know they can get away with it. So if we go out there and say, guys, what are you talking about? That the American people have not decided to fund illegal immigrants through Medicaid. So why should Mississippi taxpayers be reimbursing California because it decided to allow illegal immigrants on Medicaid? So California knows that, and they're not going to do it anymore. We already had that conversation with them. The Congress is going to pass legislation to make sure that every state appreciates this, and we don't have to fight every single time about this as a country. This is the rule. This is what you got to follow.
Dr. Oz, how much did Obamacare expand Medicaid in a way in which the program was never intended to be used?
So the cost of Medicaid has gone up 50% just in the last 5 years. And I say that because what Obamacare did was create this perversion in incentives. So now the federal government, the president, and what he needs to do to enforce the rules passed by Congress are not aligned with what the state governors are doing. So in Obamacare, for example, you take people who are not originally the Medicaid recipient, able-bodied people, and you pay extra for them than you would for the normal Medicaid population. So a woman with kids, with sick kids, gets paid less than an able-bodied man with no kids. And that's literally the law right now in America, and that's what people are getting away with. This Congress, this president is seeking to change that by saying you can't use those rules anymore. The right rule was to make sure that if you are doing things right, that you should not be paying more for able-bodied people on Medicaid than those folks on Medicare. Imagine that. You've paid into Medicare your whole life. You've contributed to the system at 2.9% tax. Everyone's paying their payroll tax. That money goes into the coffers. It's saved up for Medicare. You start getting your Medicare response. And then you go to a doctor, and doctor says, you guys don't pay me on Medicare as well as the Medicaid patient who's never worked, couldn't get a job, or whatever reason, is an able-bodied person, and they're getting paid more than any of you are. And that's something we have to change, and that's, again, part of this legislation.
So, and finally, we have 30 seconds, Dr. Oz. You're a pro. You are not cutting Medicaid. You're getting out fraud and abuse to make it be used more efficiently, correct?
We have enough money being spent already on these programs. We're cutting out fraud, waste, and abuse. In no scenario that I've seen are we spending less on Medicaid than we have before. And one of the ways we're going to do this, by the way, is making the entire system more efficient, like forcing drug companies who are taking advantage of the system to charge the same price they're charging overseas. Americans are not going to spend 3-4 times more than their counterparts overseas. That drives overall prices down so we can afford it.
Dr. Oz, 17th Administrator of the Centers for Medicare and Medicaid. Thanks so much, Dr. Oz. Great job. Speaker Gingrich, welcome.
Good to be with you, as always.
Man, there's so much flying around.
I know.
mean, first off, your reaction to, and congratulations on the book, your reaction to Musk's tweets, X posts. He said, I'm sorry, I can't go along with this. Shame on those who voted for it. You know you did wrong. You know it.
Well, look, Musk's a brilliant guy. He really did more than anybody else to get America back in the lead in space. And I admire him for his technical knowledge. He doesn't understand politics and government. He proved that the way he did, the way he came in with Doge, and walked around with a power saw when you're talking about people's lives. I mean, it was a horrible contrast. And I think he's left Washington in frustration. He has every right to have an opinion. I don't think any senators or House members are going to notice his opinion. They're going to say...
Well, Democrats have pointed out and praised him.
Of course. I mean, look, if you were a Democrat right now, Elon Musk is your favorite person because you think he's causing a problem. I suspect that President Trump is saddened. I think he liked Musk genuinely. I think he's probably not deeply shocked because Musk is a guy of very strong language and very strong opinions. And candidly, given the stories that we've seen recently about how much drug use Musk was engaged in, you have to ask yourself, under what circumstance did he say these things?
Yeah, I don't know. He didn't really deny anything, but he didn't confirm it, one of which is ketamine. But, Mr. Speaker, from what you know, it's 1,000 pages. From what you know, what do you like about this bill besides the tax cuts being renewed, and what worries you about the bill?
Well, I'm very worried that we don't have any commitment as a country right now to getting spending under control. So you go through anything you want to cut has 200 people jumping up and down screaming, that'll be horrible. And I think when I was Speaker, we balanced the budget for 4 straight years for the only time in a century. And we did it because we had a big goal, which was balancing the budget, and people would tolerate change because they saw the goal was so big. It's very hard to get these kind of cuts in a vacuum. That concerns me. I'm very concerned that we get the tax cuts through as early as possible. I think if it can get through this summer, and I think it will, then I think you're going to see next year a genuine Trump boom. I think the economy is going to be booming in a way that will be pretty startling. And you may have seen that the latest numbers on the gross domestic product were dramatically higher. I mean, there was much more economic growth in the last quarter than the economists expected.
So John Thune was on with us yesterday, and here's what he said about the CBO, which seems to be off quite a lot. And they project 1.8% growth, cut 5.
If you look at CBO, Brian, in the past, they've been, they have a long history of just flat being wrong. Over the past 7 years, when they scored the 2017 Tax Cuts and Jobs Act, and the economy grew 5% more than what they projected. Revenues were $1.5 trillion higher than what they projected in 2017. And when the Democrats passed their so-called Inflation Reduction Act last year, CBO missed the mark on energy provisions by about 400%. I mean, these guys they are notorious for missing on these projections. One thing we do know is when we reduce taxes and cut regulations and have an abundant energy supply in this country, the economy grows and expands, and that's where you start seeing these deficits get a lot smaller by comparison.
So do you hear politics in that, or do you hear facts in that?
Look, in the 4 years we balanced the budget, we fought with the Congressional Budget Office every day. There were about 500 liberals sitting in an office building, applying their totally false understanding of how the world works. I think the Congressional Budget Office ought to be replaced. I think it is destructive of America's future. And I think it is consistently wrong in underscoring the advantage of tax cuts and failing to score accurately the size of spending.
Let's talk about the President Trump. You've known him when he came onto the scene. You were open to him. You ran for president the previous cycle. So why was it a traditional conservative Republican like you were open to this outsider businessman with ideas that don't come from the conservative playbook?
Look, I tell everybody, Trump is not a traditional conservative. He didn't read National Review. He doesn't automatically fit in, but he is the most effective anti-liberal in our lifetime. And so if your opposition is to left-wing ideas, big government, huge bureaucracy, enormous amounts of deficit spending, Donald Trump's with you. If you're tired of America being taken advantage of worldwide, then Donald Trump's the right guy. He breaks out of all of the traditional mold of the national establishment, and he does it across the board, and he does it, frankly, with an enormous amount of courage.
When he was sitting in that courtroom in May, and the jury is deciding whether he's going to be convicted or not and become a felon, if I went up to Newt Gingrich and I said, Newt, what is the chance this guy's going to get the nomination to be the next president? What would you have told me?
100%. Look, the country got it. The country understood.
Even at the time you thought that?
Oh, yeah. I mean, I started writing Trump's triumph in October because I was convinced he was going to win. But I always thought he'd win because he personifies for about half the country the courage and the drive and the intelligence to break up the establishment. And there was a movement. This is part of why the book's called both Trump's Triumph and the secondary thing is America's Greatest Comeback. The American people were carrying Donald Trump. I mean, the American people helped him beat the president and then helped him beat the vice president. Nobody had ever done this in history. And I think Trump gains enormous strength when he goes to these big rallies and realizes that the New York Times may not like him, Harvard may hate him, the Democrats may be nasty, but there are millions of Americans who believe he is the one guy who can save this country.
How did he lose in 2020?
The whole election was rigged all the way through. I mean, when none of the internet companies would carry the New York Post for the last 3 weeks, as the New York Post accurately reported on the Hunter Biden laptop scandal, when 51 intelligence officers signed a totally false letter saying that the Biden laptop as a Russian.
From
ploy.
Leon Panetta, guy said respect to Mike Morrell, who,
I mean, these guys,
who was Bush's
these guys,
former deputy.
They betrayed their trust to the nation. When you have Zuckerberg at Facebook, and now Meta,
shadow banning,
putting in, I think, $420 million to turn out the vote in Democratic precincts, $420 million. If you add up every single thing, and what you had was the last stand of the old order doing everything it could to beat Donald Trump.
And you think that was part of it, but he did get more votes than anybody else in Republican history. But it's Joe Biden got 82, but 82 million.
I don't say it was stolen election day, but I say it was rigged for months and months and months. And they did everything they could to make sure he couldn't win.
Do you ever get brought up? Sometimes we forget. President Trump was president, and yet people on the outside seem to be undermining him with more power. It's like the Biden team and Democrats seem to have had more power because they had a cooperative media than the sitting president. So instead of using the power of the presidency, he was like, well, what happened? How did we lose all this influence? What was going on social media? And I feel like that's been broken. The things you described have been broken. The opposition, I mean.
Look, that's why Trump's triumph is so important, because when they did everything they could, investigations, 2 impeachments, 4 efforts to put him in jail, 2 assassination attempts, and he's still standing, and he clearly has more votes than Kamala Harris, and he carries all 7 of the swing states. I think it sort of broke morally the rational wing of the left. And they said, the country's sending us a really big signal here. Now, the emotional religious wing of the left, the AOCs, are just going to double down because they have a religious belief system, not a political belief system.
So the President of the United States also is a situation where I think he thoroughly understands the job. He went from the least experienced president to the most experienced president.
It was very, I think historians will look back and say that it was remarkably helpful that he got 4 years in the wilderness. Because if he had gotten reelected, he wouldn't have had the time to think through everything that he had learned, to think through what worked, what didn't work. It made him dramatically
Who to use, who not to use?
Yeah. I mean, so he's been much tougher about who's in the administration. And he's been much more thoughtful about realizing he's building a team. And I think he picked J.D. Vance in that sense. Vance is a year younger than Richard Nixon when Eisenhower picked Nixon. And Vance is now the youngest vice president in American history. And that was deliberate because he felt that Vance understood MAGA, and Vance would be, in fact, a continuation of Trump after the 28 election.
What's also underappreciated, but not by you in your book, is that for a 78-year-old guy, he's remarkably open to 20 and 30-year-olds. And number 2 is to something brand new. As much as he likes tradition, AI, tell me about it. Crypto, let's learn more about it. So I'm open to it. And the fact that he's open to it doesn't come off as an expert. Bring in David Sachs, come on in here. Maybe you want to be my czar for this. Let's find out what these people want. And Joe Biden made it easy by saying, I want nothing to do with either one of those things. More with Newt Gingrich in a moment. By the way, his book is now out. You should go grab it. Trump's Triumph, America's Greatest Comeback. You listen to the Brian Kilmeade Show. Hey, we are back. A few more minutes with Newt Gingrich, whose book is now out. It's called Trump's Triumph, America's Greatest Comeback. Newt, you mentioned you finished it in October. You thought for sure he was going to win.
Yeah,
right?
We began writing in October because we were confident that Trump was going to be president again. And you could just see it coming. I mean, you knew that, and this is why I wrote the book as both Trump's Triumph and America's Greatest Comeback. You knew that the American people were not going to accept Kamala Harris. They hadn't accepted Biden. And in a sense, this is the end of the Obama-Biden cycle. And you can think of this as
Clinton, too.
Yeah, it's sort of like Obama's third term.
Yeah.
Yeah.
When you look at the civil war going on with the Democratic Party, I know you're such a student of history and you lived a lot of it in modern times. But we are looking at a situation now with the Democrats where if you were by Joe Biden and didn't say anything, I'm running against you, and I'm pointing that out. I'm not waiting for a Republican. So does that mean that you could get rid of the vice president as governor, Villaraigosa goes after him. Does that mean that you could just say to Pete Buttigieg, Mr. Secretary, you ignored the American people, you let a failing president there, and does that marginalize all these people's political future?
Yeah, I think anybody who was close to Biden is going to have a very hard time getting through the next cycle of primaries, because their competitors are going to say, you were part of lying to the American people. Why should we believe you now?
I get the sense that Trump has changed over the last couple of days, where he's like, I am blaming Biden less and his people more. He wants to get to the end
right.
because he can't figure out why anyone would let the border, for example, go down like that. How you leave Afghanistan the way you did. How does that make sense?
Well, and look, I think you can almost stipulate that sometime, maybe by 23, Biden wasn't there. I mean, what you have to then say is, so who are the people who took over the power constitutionally of the president? I mean, my favorite example is in early January after the election, there are 2,400 commutations signed in one day. Now,
how do you do that?
Somebody somewhere put that list together. Why? Why is each name on there? What's the deal? They then instructed the autopen operator on behalf of the president, who had no idea what they were doing. And I just think it's crazy.
I'm wondering, do you have 2,400 commutations? And did someone get paid on that? Well, I mean, when people give me some money, my murdering uncle needs to get out of prison.
You have to wonder what the deal was in each one of those cases. And that's only one day. But then you have to look at all the money that they were dumping out of the Department of Energy. I think $93 billion. Right. Secretary Wright called it shoveling it out. So who was making those kind of decisions? And I think what you're going to find is this is the largest scandal in American history, much bigger than anything we've ever seen before. There were more people breaking the law and behaving as though they were president than we've ever seen.
How do you ever get someone to admit that?
Put them under oath, and as I've heard Chairman Comer say just like last night, if they lie under oath, it is a felony, and this administration will prosecute.
Do you think they're too slow to hit them with subpoenas?
I think they're going through a process which is sort of built into the law that we have to come up and say to you, pretty please, you have to have a chance to get a lawyer, and then when that's up, we can then subpoena you if you refuse to come in voluntarily.
We lived through Trump's comeback. What do we see in your book that you wouldn't get unless you had the view of Newt Gingrich?
Well, I think the whole understanding of really sort of a dance between the American people who were determined to stop this left-wing system and an extraordinarily charismatic leader who was able to become the symbol of that change and to become, particularly after Butler, when he was shot and he stood up and put his fist up in the air and chanted, fight, fight, fight. I mean, at that point, he became an iconic leader in a way that's almost like the Middle Ages. And this is an astonishing moment.
And he's in a rush to get things done, and I think we're all going to benefit from it. Speaker Gingrich, thanks so much. Pick up his book, Trump's Triumph.
If you dig in on what Democrats are researching right now, you're going to find a lot of silly stuff. You're going to find people asking a lot of questions, people asking about syntax and do I drop the G from this word and this and that, and it's going to be a lot of that. So let me just warn everybody, that process is going to be very obnoxious. We're really talking about young men, right? Young men who Democrats have not figured out a consistent pitch for how to get in front of. And I think it starts with authenticity. Stop creating purity tests for people because they don't agree with you 8 or 9 times.
Right. And that is a more civilized way that to talk than James Carville usually talks, but that's what he's been saying. John Reinish joins us now, Democratic strategist, and that was another Democratic strategist just speculating on where the party goes from here as the Republicans have their own fight about passing the big, beautiful bill. John, welcome back.
Thanks, man. Good to have you.
So your thought right now on the Democrats' push, number one, I guess their focus over the last few weeks has been winning back men. What went wrong? What do you say?
Well, when your political and media ecosystem, your messaging ecosystem, and look, I'll speak bluntly, has spent the past decade or so demonizing men, demonizing young men, telling them how wrong they are. Take a seat, guy, etc. You're going to have trouble getting hired. You're going to have trouble getting into college, etc. So when you spend your time doing that, what do you think the effect is going to be? It's going to alienate people from you. So now there's this whole sort of rush to, quote, get young men back. Maybe it'll work and maybe it doesn't, but what you got to do is meet people where they are, chill with the demonization, right? And be the party that creates opportunity for everyone, doesn't organize people in this DC Beltway way by identities.
So it was speculated by John on Mark Halpern's two-way talk. He was having a conversation. He says one of the worst things that could happen to Democrats is for them to win the House, because they will spend the next 2 years going after Trump. Whatever it was, indicting his family, trying to impeach him. And it'll stop them from looking for 2028 candidates that would turn the page and get them in a new focus. Well, what is your thoughts about that?
I will say that. If Democrats become smart and strategic again, they won't be looking for 2028 candidates inside the Beltway, inside the baggage-heavy Washington ecosystem. They will be looking at state capitals, governors who are popular, charismatic, capable, and win the center. So look, is it my hope that Democrats do take back the House? Of course. Is the margin razor thin? And if history proves, as history frequently does, which is to be correct, party out of power loses seats. Speaker Johnson has very few seats to lose. So look, but however, to your point, Democrats, should they win, should spend time doing popular things, positioning their 2028 candidate, whoever they may be, for success, not proceeding on the kind of hunts that you're talking about, which proved very unpopular and, quite frankly, only made Donald Trump stronger.
So when you look at, James Comer's going to go ahead and find out who was working the autopen. Was the president really for the 2,400 commutations at the end, let alone the bigger ones with preemptive pardons to Fauci, Milley, and his son? So it looks like he will actually sign the Hunter one, but it looks like an autopen signed the other one. I don't know how you get to the bottom of it without going after the president himself, which I don't think he has to submit, although Reagan did do and testify after he was done. Here's Victor Davis Hanson, a military historian from Hoover, cut 16.
What Biden did in those 4 years will go down in presidential history as one of the most egregious transgressions against the American people. And every day we're going to learn about an innocent person killed, somebody from the Middle East terrorizing a Jewish person. It's going to keep going. And these are like landmines because there was no audit, there was no background checks, there was no nothing.
And he's talking about the border.
Right.
And the 8 million people minimum that got through at the time, and no one could understand it. I watched Senator Fetterman the other day and says, yeah, we should have enforced the border. Of course we should have enforced the border. That's not a Republican thing, because I thought Barack Obama was doing a lot of deportations, right? Bill Clinton, if you roll back some of his cuts, he sounds more determined than Donald Trump to shut down the border.
Right. Well, it was one of those, there's a lot to unpack it in this, but let me just say this. It is a stunning example of just how out of step the Biden administration and the establishment DC Democrats that followed them unquestionably in pursuing unpopular politics and unpopular policy. Voters spoke with one voice. What matters to us? Public safety, and we include the border in that. The affordability crisis, we include inflation in that. And the Biden administration either answered with wonky data, which no one can relate to, or they say you're wrong, or you're racist, or that doesn't exist. And then that put the whole party at a disadvantage. But this is what happens when you don't get outside the Beltway and you're listening to special interest purity test groups, which I know your guests have talked a lot about. One more quick thought, Brian, if you don't mind. You did mention Comer. I will say there is a flashing red light for him, too. It is maybe not wise, throw some red meat at the base, but to spend your time, instead of delivering on the Trump's agenda and doing things that the American people put you in power to do in terms of delivering results and being seen as focusing on the past at pursuing the Biden family, I don't know outside of the base of the Republican base how interesting that is to voters. So I think that there's a warning sign there.
I think there's so too, but the problem is the oversight. That's what they do, basically.
Sure.
But I do think that there's definitely a risk there. For example, what is the goal? So let's say you find out that these cadre of people that Jake Tapper writes about, Politburo, kept the cabinet secretaries at bay and made all these decisions. All right. Having said that, and so like when you find that out, it's terrible. It's historians will have a field day with this.
Sure.
But then what your point, John, is then what?
Well,
right, because those people don't run for office anyway.
Then what into what end? And also, when you talk about the Politburo, Richetti and Nero less so. Nero was not up there in that inner circle in the White House. It was Reid, Richetti, Schultz, Donnellan, Dunn. It's the Valerie Biden Owens. It's those people. Nero was never that close in I think my estimation. But I will say this: those people are not of consequence anymore. Those people are not getting hired.
So that's your point.
Those people are not getting hired for any jobs. They are the past. They're not the future. So what's the impact really going to be? These people are in their 80s. They're probably all trying to get book deals. I wouldn't read that book. But, those people are also really exiles within the party now of their own doing.
Because they were bullies, too. They would intimidate, according to Tapper and company, when they would try to get close, they would get bulldozed.
Sure.
How dare you ask this question?
You're ageist.
Yeah, or we're going to lock you out.
Sure.
So here's Senator Fetterman, another guy who's persona non grata with the left, but maybe you have a different view. Here he is speaking on Monday side by side with Dave McCormick, the Republican from Pennsylvania, Cut 21.
The more kinds of left kind of media continues to have these kinds of an attack, and it's just part of a smear, and that's just not it's just not accurate. And we move on, and why we're still having this conversation? Why at this point? I'm here, I'm doing that job, I'm defending on all those things and all of those important votes. I'd like to point out that Bernie and Senator Murray missed more. So why aren't the left media yelling and demanding them and claiming they're not doing their job and those kind of a thing? Just be genuine on that.
What do you hear? What's the reality in Washington about Senator Fetterman? Are they mad that he's a moderate, or they think that he is not doing his job?
I think there's a mixture. I will say this: I think there's another layer. I think that this was a huge attempt by the far progressive left to punish a pro-Israel supporter. I think that's a big factor.
What about the fact that he went to Mar-a-Lago? Did that bother
Donald
people?
Trump won his state. John Fetterman is a blue-collar guy who represents broad swaths of voters, many of whom voted for Donald Trump. Fetterman very intelligently realized, and Fetterman's not a kiss-ass, but Fetterman realized Trump won my state. I should have a relationship with the president. I should work across the aisle to deliver for Pennsylvania. And if that puts him in Dutch with the base, with the activist base, so what? I think that he's had his challenges, mental health, physical health. That's been well documented. But I think he's being punished by the progressive base, including some of his own staff for being a pro-Israel guy. I also think that, the far left is still insistent on these purity tests. Look how far that got them.
By the way, he lost another staffer, I think, yesterday. Resigned. We don't know why. Maybe that's one of the reasons.
Here's how many voters are interested in staff palace intrigue on the Hill. 0.
Here is Senator. So I asked Senator Thune, "Are you going after Fetterman?" Remember, Jim Jeffords famously flipped the Senate by changing parties. Cut 22. Senator Fetterman's indication he's fed up with the Democratic Party. Have you actively recruited him for the Republican Party?
Well, we've got people who are talking to him. I don't think at this point he's, and I can't speak for him, but I know, Brian, that there are overtures, obviously, that get made. And I think more than anything else, we just want him to know that he shouldn't let those guys get him down. I mean, he's under attack by his own side, by the far left in this country, and he's making some hard votes. And if he wants a place or a home in the Republican Party, I'll tell you what, we'll welcome him.
It seems like they're not. What do you think?
Well, if they tried and failed to recruit Joe Manchin for years, I think they are going to half-heartedly try. I think it's more of a talking point than anything. I don't think there's a real effort, and I don't think that John Fetterman is flipping to Republican.
Do you think that Joe Manchin helped or hurt your party by standing up to the 52 states, standing up against adding 2 states, and standing up against the filibuster to keep it?
I think that he impeded a lot of progress that could have delivered for the Democratic Party. I think he took somewhat of a perverse joy in doing so. But again...
But what about those 2 things I said?
Well...
how do you feel about the adding 2 states? He probably was the only one standing in the way, along with Sinema.
Yeah, I also think that was a big talking point. There was never any real mechanism in place to do all of this. Filibuster, they
pretty bad now.
Yeah,
for you guys.
And it's really bad. And look, the road to retake the Senate is beyond uphill for Democrats. But I will say to Democratic voters in the party and activists, we need a John Fetterman. Who's going to win Pennsylvania? I mean, and if you look outside of certain mid-hanging fruit in the Senate map in 2026. Do we really think that we're going to be, I mean, hopefully one can break through and do things differently and being competitive in red states. We used to be much more competitive in red states, just the way Republicans used to be much more competitive in blue states. But things are very much sorted on a partisan basis right now.
Maine, for example, Collins is needed in Maine. People can only get so mad at Susan Collins because she has to represent Maine.
Sure, and Maine is a blue state. The second district is much more red, but Maine is a blue state, and Collins has a beyond well-established brand there. Sarah Gideon tried really hard, last time around, raised tens and tens and tens of millions of dollars. The polling was in her favor. She lost by like 8 points because Susan Collins was so well-established, and people trusted her and felt they knew her.
Lastly, when it comes to the border, do you believe that the Democrats, when they decide to run again, will talk about a strong border because they saw what it cost them and they also saw Trump basically just shut it down? So when people say it's not possible, you could actually take that off the table almost by saying that we're for a strong border.
Democrats should unequivocally be for a strong border. That is being pro-public safety, strong national defense. This is also what voters, including Democratic voters, want. And look, evil genius, but like the most talented political practitioner were Greg Abbott and Ron DeSantis sending migrants into blue states. That made even a lot of Democratic voters in cities say, "Oh, this is what you guys have been going through in border cities in Texas. I think I understand now."
Your stand on the elite institutions highlighting anti-Israeli behavior, in some cases pro-Hamas. You look at the cover in the New York Post.
Sure.
Your sense on education and where the Democrats should stand.
I mean, that the Democrats allowed themselves to be tarred with the globalized, the Intifada group, I think really hurt them with Jews in the last election. You saw Jews in the suburbs, not even just in swing states like Pennsylvania, flip red for the first time since Reagan. But you also saw it in the suburbs around New York City, New Jersey, Connecticut, Nassau County, Westchester. And a lot of Jewish voters flipped because the feeling was Democrats are coddling these anti-Semitic activists on campus. Why? Because they're afraid of losing their own base? That's not even accurately your base.
Before we go, the top 3 candidates that you're looking at now to see if they've got presidential timber on the left.
Sure. And luckily, they're not on the far left. They're right in the center, and they're charismatic and talented people. Bashir from Kentucky, Shapiro, who Kamala Harris should have picked as her VP from Pennsylvania, Wes Moore of Maryland.
And you look to see a lot of governors on that debate stage.
Absolutely. Go outside of Washington. Everyone hates Washington. Be a capable chief executive from a state.
John Reinish, Democratic strategist, thanks so much.
Thank you.
I'm doing Gutfeld tonight. You can watch it live at 10 p.m. Eastern time. I have not seen the rundown, but Allison has. Allison, you said I should just play this soundbite, and then I should get rid. This is my prep for tonight.
We're prepping for Gutfeld.
Okay.
That particular school and that book, Me and Earl and the Dying Girl, are you gonna eat her? Yeah, Earl, I'm going to eat her.
Madam?
Hey.
I would ask that if we not try to use that type of language in the chamber, let's try to keep some decorum. I know you were talking specific books, but if we could reframe those type of words differently, because there's also people and children watching this debate, I just don't want that language out there. So I will ask kindly if we could just use either a different word or something different, just out of respect for others that might get offended. Thank you.
Mr. Speaker,
Representative Dauphin.
I stand here to share with the chamber the books that are available in our public school libraries to the very children. You're telling me that this language isn't appropriate in this chamber. This is in elementary school libraries approved by the very individuals that are supposed to be the experts.
Is that unbelievable? So she's reading the title, and obviously it's X-rated, and they have an objection to it, but they don't have objections to the books being in the library.
You know, yeah, exactly. The language is incredible for an elementary scholl library. They gavel her out. How dare you say that word? It's offensive. But yes, let's let our kids read it at will in their public school library.
Right, and that's why, with the way they twist it is, Ron DeSantis looking to ban books. Republicans are looking to ban books. Yeah, appropriate books for appropriate ages. That's called appropriate. Yeah. But how do they message it?
Exactly. And so this happened in Connecticut. This is the Connecticut chamber where this was a Republican congresswoman reading it and then them saying it was highly inappropriate. I mean, elementary schools generally, to fifth grade or so? I mean, yeah, I don't think a fifth grader needs to be reading
now
that.
We have 6th, 7th, and 8th in our schools. So that's a little different. The other thing that I found offensive is that the Pittsburgh Steelers are saying that they apologize to their fans that are offended that Rocky Bleier, the Steeler legend and war hero, gave his Pittsburgh Steeler jersey to President Trump. Listen to Rocky Bleier do this and now see the backlash because of it. Cup 40.
Mr. President, on behalf of U.S. Steel and to the people of Pittsburgh, more importantly, though, to all the Steeler fans that are here this evening, I have the honor of making you an honorary Pittsburgh Steeler and would like to present to you your jersey with the number 47 as the 47th President of the United States, a number that hangs in the National Football League Hall of Fame. I'd like to present this to a Hall of Fame president. Please accept it.
So that was Rocky Bleier. Of course, U.S. Steel was saved by the president. He engineered a deal with Nippon Steel from Japan. Great moment. They're going to be adding like 150,000 jobs minimum in U.S. Steel, so it stays in Pittsburgh. Steelers get it. And that stays there, and he thought he'd give a jersey. But they're getting blowback now from Steeler fans saying, I don't want the president associated with the Steelers.
The statement that the Steelers did put back basically said, we appreciate your feedback, Ben. Our alumni and current players make their own individual decisions that reflect their views and do not necessarily represent the view of the entire Pittsburgh Steeler organization.
And let me also bring up that Franco Harris passed away. Nice guy, big-time Democrat. He was always endorsing John Kerry, Al Gore, going out of his way for Bill Clinton. Did they apologize or put out a statement for Franco Harris?
Not
Come
that I
on,
recall.
Please. Rocky Bleier, by the way, one of the great, they did movies about his life. He was wounded in Vietnam, came all the way back, a Notre Dame star, ended up starring along with Franco Harris in the backfield. I think he was part of 4 Super Bowls with Terry Bradshaw as quarterback. Listen to the Brian Kilmeade Show. Keep it here. Don't forget, Sunday, 10 p.m., One Nation.